what's up guys, Gave Productions here. It's been a while and I would like to apologize for that. I've been pretty caught up with school stuff, so yeah, that's pretty much the main explanation. Also, I did mention that I would have a video about my Samsung service repairs, but I realized that maybe that could possibly not be the best video to make since I no longer really have hard evidence of those repairs, and so it would be a little shady for me to kind of just upload all of that based on memory, and as we all know, memory isn't the most reliable. Because of that, I've chosen to shelve that video, at least for the time being, and instead shift my focus to making my reviews for two new devices, one of which I have here right now, the Samsung Galaxy Tab S8 Ultra. Let's get into it. So first things first, the unboxing. My Galaxy Tab S8 Ultra was part of a pre-order deal here in Singapore where you were able to get the keyboard cover, this keyboard cover, for free, as well as a 500GB T5 SSD. While the SSD was shipped to me after I got the tablet, the keyboard cover was surprisingly included in the box. So without the pre-order deal, you probably won't find this keyboard cover inside like I did. Underneath the keyboard cover, you get the Tab S8 Ultra itself, and below that you get your SIM tray / SD card tray tool, your USB-C to C cable, and some paperwork. There is no power brick in the box. As you can see, this box is pretty thin, so if you want to make use of the 45W charging that this tablet is capable of, you're going to have to either buy one from Samsung or get one from a third-party retailer. With the unboxing out of the way, let's get into the actual review. So let's first talk about the build quality of this tablet and their ergonomics. For reference, my previous daily tablet that I use mostly for school purposes was the Galaxy Tab S3. In terms of build quality, this tablet is made by what Samsung calls Armor Aluminium. It is a aluminium unibody, unlike my Galaxy Tab S3, which was a glass sandwich. The Armor Aluminium that Samsung is using is supposedly their strongest aluminium alloy yet, but I'm not gonna test it because I need this tablet in one piece. Overall, the design differs quite a lot from my Galaxy Tab S3, but that is a pretty old tablet. Most of Samsung's recent tablets have pretty much been this aluminium unibody design. So it is very similar to the Tab S7 series and the S8 and S8 Plus. It is pretty much just a blown up version of those tablets, minus the display. The display is a bit different, but I'll get to that later. So for the tablet, you have two speakers at the top of the device and a microphone as well. On the bottom, you have two more speakers, a USB-C port. On the right side of the device, you get your power button, your volume buttons, and another microphone as well as your SIM tray / SD card tray. And on the left side, you get your 3-pin connectors to connect to accessories like this keyboard over here, as well as the two alignment holes for the keyboard. And on the back of the device, you have your two cameras over here, along with your flash, another microphone, and the place to store your S Pen and charge it as well. Also, I forgot to mention that over here on the right side of the tablet is a place to store your S Pen temporarily, but this place will not charge the S Pen. If you want to charge the S Pen, it has to be at this glass surface over here right below the cameras. And lastly, on the front of the tablet, you have your very massive 14.6-inch display, along with your two cameras over here and the notch. In my opinion, the design is pretty solid and it isn't ugly or anything. I wouldn't call it beautiful, but it is a pretty functional design overall. The only thing I can think about in terms of complaints for this tablet is not really the notch, but more of the fact that this tablet might just be a little bit unnecessarily thin. But I'm sure Samsung has a reason for that, and my guess is that it is to keep the tablet as light as possible. Since I've already mentioned the display, let's talk about that. This is a 14.6-inch display with an aspect ratio of 16:10, which is nice, and a resolution of 2960 by 1840p. So this means that it is higher than 1440p, but not so much 4K. Its pixel density isn't the highest, but on a display this big, the resolution is fine, and you can only see the pixels when you get close enough. Otherwise, not many complaints on the sharpness. It is also a 120Hz panel, which is not adaptive refresh for some reason, even though it totally should have been in order to save more battery life, but at least it is 120Hz and not 60Hz. While the Tab S8 Ultra's display tops out at 500 nits, which isn't really the brightest, it's definitely good enough indoors and on a more cloudy day here in Singapore. Overall, the display is fantastic, and there is very little to complain about over here. Most complaints are just nitpicks like the non-adaptive refresh rate and the not so super bright display. But as you've seen by now, and as I've mentioned, there is a notch, and if you're wondering why I'm only talking about it now, it's because the notch is so out of the way that it is quite unnoticeable. You know, the notch is there and it can look a bit unnecessary, but I'm pretty sure that Samsung would not have placed it there if the two cameras would fit there without the notch. I think that the notch is there because of how thin the bezels on this display is. So if they probably made the bezels thicker, then of course the notch would have disappeared. But because they chose and opted to make the bezel so thin, the notch is there. But of course, if you do make the bezels thicker, you either make the display smaller or you make the chassis bigger. So there's some trade-offs to, you know, making the bezels bigger in order to not have the notch. So I guess it's just a choice of preference, and for me, the notch is very shallow, it's not very deep, so it's not really very noticeable in my opinion. The one place where the notch might be noticeable is if you're using the display in vertical mode, because, you know, maybe you are a musician and you need to use music sheets on these things. Like me, I do play the piano, so you can see the notch is on the right side of the display. So this is kind of the only time that I really notice the notch is there, is when it's on a white display and I'm using the tablet in vertical mode. One thing to know about the notch though is that it acts very much as if it wasn't there, kind of like the new MacBook Pros, which means that the tablet kind of just acts as if there's, you know, the display continues below the notch, and so if anything is to just go right underneath the notch, you won't see it, but the tablet will still think that you can, because the tablet just kind of pretends that the notch isn't there. So that's kind of interesting. Also, the last thing to talk about the display is the fact that the fingerprint sensor is optical and not ultrasonic, which is an interesting decision made by Samsung. As you can see over here, the fingerprint sensor does light up with a bright white light, showing that it is optical and not ultrasonic. I was actually expecting Samsung to use an ultrasonic fingerprint sensor because this is a very expensive tablet, and Samsung does use ultrasonic on most of its high-end smartphones. So it's quite interesting that they chose and opt to go for an optical one over here, but I guess it works well enough, and the security benefit between ultrasonic and optical is there, but it isn't that massive. Next, let's talk about the performance. So the performance as a whole is good. You know, not the best performance that I've seen on an Android device, but good nonetheless. As you probably have seen from any Geekbench results or other benchmarks, the Snapdragon 8 Gen 1 chip in this tablet does not perform as well as many other Android smartphones that use the Snapdragon 8 Gen 1 as well. As far as most are guessing, it's probably intentional, and it's probably due to how thin this tablet is, and so the thinness probably meant that they couldn't build in a thick enough heat spreader or cooling solution, which thus meant that they had to throttle this chip down in order to prevent it from getting too hot. But when I've used this daily, the tablet never really got past just being slightly warm, which makes me feel that maybe Samsung could have just throttled it a little higher instead of this low. But honestly, in day-to-day use, you're not really going to notice any lag or anything like that. It works flawlessly, it's smooth, and there is very minimal things that I'll complain about in terms of performance. And since I am talking about performance, let's talk about the performance specs of this tablet. So here in Singapore, you can only pick up one model of the Galaxy Tab S8 Ultra, and that is the Tab S8 Ultra 5G with Sub-6 5G, by the way. I'm not sure if other regions get a millimeter wave 5G version of the tablet, but in Singapore, it is a Sub-6 5G. And you can only choose the 256GB version with 12GB of RAM. In other regions, there are a 128GB version and a 512GB version with 16GB of RAM, which would arguably be better for future-proofing. But hey, the 256GB on this device, along with expandable storage and 12GB of RAM, is not that bad either. Also, as with many newer Samsung devices, you can now use up to 8GB of internal storage as VRAM or virtual RAM, which should help to some extent. All in all, performance is, as I said, good, and most people using this tablet would not complain. The only place where you probably would notice the power deficiency between your tablet and your Android smartphone is probably in gaming and video editing, which is video editing is done by some people, so that could be a bit disappointing, but I'm sure the tablet will work more or less fine. With all that power, however, how good is the battery life of this tablet? Well, despite it being this thin, they managed to include a pretty big 11,200 mAh battery, which has generally been pretty good. definitely much better than my Tab S3, that's for sure. As I use this tablet mainly for school purposes, my usage varies from using over 100% of the battery a day, which means that I have to charge it midday, to only having, to charge this tablet maybe once every 2 days. Many factors do affect the battery life of this tablet, such as how many apps you have open at a certain time, how bright is your display, and are you constantly connected to the detachable keyboard, and etc. Despite having to charge midday though, it was pretty fast, especially since I have a 120 watt gallium nitride charger, which meant that I was able to charge this tablet with super fast charging 2.0, which is at 45 watts. Let's move on to the speakers. So they're generally pretty good. For those who don't know, higher end Samsung devices also have a Dolby Atmos button in the notification tray, which I recommend that you try. In general, what I've noticed is that it gives you a bit more definition and volume in general. These speakers are definitely good enough for portable entertainment, but of course they don't have, a ton of bass. But it's definitely, they're just not as good as dedicated speakers, of course. They are definitely much better than many laptops that you can probably find out there, but they're definitely also not MacBook Pro level. So they're kind of in between. I'll say they lean towards the MacBook Pro level more than the low-end laptop market. So all in all, speakers are pretty good. In terms of microphone quality, these are how the microphones on the Galaxy Tab S8 Ultra sound like. Keep in mind, if I do sound a bit muffled, it's because I am wearing a mask. But you have the general feel of how all three microphones do sound like. At the same time, you can also see how the video quality is like. This is currently recording at 1080p 30 FPS. And here is the video quality at ultra wide. What you were seeing just now was standard wide, and this is also 1080p 30 FPS, and it's quite soft in my opinion. It's not very clear. There is also no stabilization on both cameras. This is the front-facing camera for the standard wide. No stabilization, but they're not really meant to use this tablet while walking anyways. Here's the ultra wide. It's not the worst cameras. I would say it's similar to maybe a mid-range smartphone, but definitely not up there with your S22 series or your flagship phones as well. So these cameras are alright for what you'd probably be using them for, which is basically, document scanning for the rear cameras and video calling for the two front cameras. And I should probably mention the specs of these cameras. So on the back you get a 13 megapixel wide camera at f2.0 and a 6 megapixel ultra wide camera at f2.2. So pretty decent aperture sizes, but probably not very good for low light, just good enough in general. On the front you get a 12 megapixel wide camera at f2.2 and another 12 megapixel ultra wide camera at f2.4. So generally slightly worse in terms of the aperture size, so in low light they may perform worse than the rear cameras, but as long as you are in a decently lit environment, the camera should be fine. So in terms of quality, I'm honestly not very impressed, especially for how much these tablets cost. I would have expected them to maybe be at least as good as the Galaxy S22 series of cameras, not the S22 Ultra, but maybe the standard S22. But like I said, they're probably good enough for what they are meant to do. Lastly, let's talk about the software, and I'll have a lot to talk about the software over here, after which maybe I'll just touch a bit on the keyboard cover as well as the S Pen. So the software running on Samsung tablets have always been the Achilles heel, which is basically running Android. Unfortunately, as of this year and as of recording, the software still feels pretty half-baked. So the Tab S8 Ultra runs using Android 12 and not Android 12L, with One UI 4.1. So in essence, the UI of the Tab S8 Ultra is essentially very similar to what your phone would be if you had blown out the display to a 14.6 inch size at a 16:10 ratio. Most of the apps tend to behave that way, and almost none are optimized for this big display. For example, your productivity apps like Microsoft Office and Google Docs, Google Slides and all that kind of stuff all feel pretty lackluster, and that's because they are the exact same version as those that you run on your Android phone. And so these apps are pretty much watered down versions of their counterparts that you find on a desktop operating system like macOS and Windows. The problem here is that I'm trying really hard to use this as a laptop replacement for school, and the apps just being this limited and quite cumbersome to use at times can really get in the way and just make me a bit frustrated. We also have other apps like Instagram, for example, which just simply doesn't work in landscape, so I guess Instagram, just doesn't really work for iPad and Android. There is a small workaround, however, which is to basically use Instagram in DeX mode, which allows you to, use the app in landscape. Although when you're viewing stories, it's pretty much just they kind of crop out the top and bottom of the video according to what aspect ratio you're watching the video on. Speaking about DeX has been a nice to have on this 14.6-inch display. While DeX does add some functionality in the ability to open apps as windows instead of just having them split, it is a game changer, but not that much anymore. I personally found the ability to open and split 3 apps across the display in normal mode more useful than just splitting 2 apps in window mode across the display. And that's where DeX kind of starts to fall apart. While it was a novelty when it first came out, it's now starting to lag behind a little compared to the standard mode on the tablet. For example, I've just mentioned in standard mode you can snap 3 apps perfectly, 2 on the left and 1 on the right, or 2 on the right and 1 on the left. However, in DeX you can only snap 2 windows on left and right and not a third or fourth window. I've also noticed that DeX tends to show a bit of lag in certain areas, like when opening the multitasking window. It usually takes a second or two for the apps to load on the screen, which is very interesting because this doesn't happen in standard mode. Overall, DeX has been pretty good at making this tablet feel more like a laptop replacement. However, that's pretty much all it can do, is kind of just make this tablet feel more like a laptop replacement, but not really add that much value to it being a laptop replacement. DeX still has some way to go in adding real value to Samsung's tablets to make it be more like a laptop replacement rather than just feeling closer to one. Back to the standard software experience though, overall Android 12 and One UI are a great combination, even though they aren't fully optimized to make use of this giant 14.6-inch display. Some features have been added though, like the aforementioned 3 app split mode, and thankfully this tablet does have 4 years of OS update support, which is fantastic. Although those updates do tend to take forever to reach Samsung devices in Singapore, but hey, at least we do get them eventually. So some of my items in the wishlist for Samsung and app developers is to basically update the apps to be more useful on this 14.6-inch display, as well as maybe create a separate version of One UI to fully make use of the real estate that we get over here. Because for a whopping 2,188 Singapore dollars, many are looking to buy this tablet not just for a tablet, but also potentially to be using it as a laptop replacement. Also, did I mention that price is technically without the keyboard cover included, which is an additional 548 Singapore dollars, which is way too much for a keyboard. I must mention, however, that as of shooting this video, there is a new promotion for the Tab S8 Ultra, which gets you the keyboard cover for free again, and an additional 256GB micro SD card, which is a pretty good deal in my opinion. All in all, I do hope that Microsoft and Google work on their productivity apps, or maybe just straight up port the desktop versions of the apps to Android and iPadOS tablets, because these things can make the most out of those apps. Also, I'll just touch quickly on the ability to use this tablet as a second display. It works alright, it's pretty good, but there is definitely some latency between the tablet as a display and your laptop, but that's because it only works via wireless and not wired. But I'm still glad that the feature exists and is here nonetheless. It can definitely be useful to anyone with a Windows PC or a Windows laptop just that they bring around together with this tablet. Another software grievance I have is the fact that while you can set this tablet to automatically start DeX when attaching the keyboard, for some reason the tablet doesn't have an option to exit DeX when taking the keyboard off. And this is a perfect segue into me talking about the keyboard. So, this keyboard cover came free with my Galaxy Tab S8 Ultra. Without any knowledge of the price tag and the fact that this thing came included with my tab, I would say that this keyboard is overall pretty good. The best feature about it for me is the fact that it does come in 2 pieces, which means that when you don't need the keyboard, you can just kind of take it off and use the tablet with a stand, maybe just to watch your videos or to take notes, which is pretty nice. In general, the typing experience is also pretty great. The keys feel pretty snappy and clicky. I'm not really sure whether it's clicky or tactile, but there is a nice feeling over here, and I'll akin this keyboard to feeling like a more firm version of a scissor stout keyboard. Also, it does have a function roll, which is very nice. One big upgrade that this keyboard has over the Tab S8/S7 series of keyboards is the fact that this keyboard is also now backlit. But the backlight is very dim, and you will only notice them in a dark environment. So that's a little disappointing, but at least it's been added to this keyboard nonetheless. The trackpad is also alright, I guess. It's decently large and quite precise, although it can feel a little wonky at times, but that might have something to do with the software. There is one thing about this keyboard though that is kind of weird and I don't really like, and it's the fact that the right side of the palm rest can get a bit warm when using the keyboard. My guess is because there is a chip inside that is probably just, to control all the functions of the keyboard, so it's pretty much the brain of the keyboard. It doesn't get hot, it just gets a little warm, but it's weird because only the right side of the palm rest will get warm while the left side is completely cool, so that unevenness is just a little bit uncomfortable. Additionally, it seems like this keyboard often goes to sleep very quickly in order to save the tab's battery. What do I mean by sleep? So, essentially, after not using this keyboard for just, a few seconds, you will have to press a key or click the trackpad in order to wake it, and then you can use it. So this leads to a short delay between the time that you want to type to when you can actually type. This goes for the trackpad too, where the moment you start typing, the trackpad kind of goes to sleep or is disabled. So there is a delay between when you type and when your cursor on the screen can start moving again. This is kind of annoying, but my guess is because all this is done in order to save the Tab S8's battery, which is okay, I guess. It's just a little bit inconvenient. In general, the whole build of this keyboard and the back cover is pretty sturdy, but one thing I am worried about is the rubber on the sides, on the seams of the keyboards and the cover, which could potentially wear over time. I can already feel the seam up on my tablet where the flap for the S Pen is, having quite a bit of bumps just from me using my finger to open and close the flap every day. So the big question is, should you get this keyboard with the Tab S8 Ultra? At 548 Singapore dollars, it is very hard to justify. That is definitely too much to pay for a keyboard cover, and I'll recommend only buying this tablet if there is a keyboard thrown with the tablet as a promotion. If not, it is not very worth it, and I'll recommend just maybe getting the book cover for the keyboard as well as a third-party thin keyboard from Keychron or something. Lastly, let's talk about the S Pen, the star of the show of every Galaxy Tab. Actually, I'm not sure if every Galaxy Tab comes with the S Pen, but for every Galaxy Tab S, which comes with an S Pen, let's talk about it. So, the S Pen experience as a whole has been pretty awesome. It only has a 2.8 milliseconds latency, which definitely helps the tablet and the S Pen feel more like a true writing experience. Well, as true as it can be writing on glass. The large size of this S Pen and the size of the canvas definitely makes writing feel more natural, as there is almost no notable lag between the line being produced on the screen and the tip of your S Pen. Also, it seems like this S Pen holds its charge for a pretty long time. I'm not sure, but maybe it could be because Samsung decided to put a battery in this S Pen, unlike the Note and the S22 Ultra's S Pen, which use a capacitor. Those only hold about half an hour of charge. This pen, however, lasts for many hours before needing another charge, so that's a big plus as well. My biggest gripe with the S Pen, however, and all devices that do ship with an S Pen like the Note 20 and even the S22 Ultra, is the fact that Samsung no longer includes spare S Pen tips with your device. This has been going on for some years now, but not only that, they also don't sell the S Pen tips in stores anymore, which is frustrating. I have seen so many forums asking Samsung about this, and the most common reply from them is the fact that the new S Pen tips installed or included with your S Pen are a lot more durable and thus don't wear out as fast. Okay, but they do wear, and I know a lot of people who would like to have their S Pen tips changed. So even if you don't include extra tips anymore in an effort to maybe go green, because I do know many people who've also never touched the replacement tips given with their old tabs and notes, at least give people the option to buy them directly from you instead of having to go to some shady third party to get S Pen tips, which just may not feel as good. And really, what's so difficult about that? If Apple can do it, so can you, Samsung. Let's wrap up then. Overall, the Galaxy Tab S8 Ultra is probably the best and most complete Android tablet you can buy to date. Minus some questionable design choices and teething issues in software, this tablet can actually be a decent laptop replacement given the right situations. If you're a student like me just going for daily lectures and seminars, then this is an absolutely fine tablet to use as your only device. But when it comes to essay typing or having to do exams via Lockdown Browser, you probably should use a proper laptop as Lockdown Browser isn't supported on Android. Also, Microsoft Word is just so much better on Windows and macOS. At a whopping 2,188 Singapore dollars, this tablet is not only not for everyone, but is quite a niche product. 14.6 inches is pretty big, and this tablet really represents the people who want the best of an Android tablet to date. And under that category is also a subset of people who are mainly Samsung users like me, who just find it convenient to use a Samsung tablet with a Samsung phone and maybe Samsung earbuds and so on. Of course, there are also the people who probably have been looking for a laptop replacement that isn't the iPad Pro or iPad Air. At the end of the day, if you're looking to get this tablet, you need to know what you want from it, and only from there, think about whether or not the compromises and the price tag would be a deal breaker. If they aren't, then the next thing you need to do is to wait for a keyboard cover promotion, because there is no way anyone should spend $2,736 on this tablet. At that price, you could go for a pretty good affordable laptop as well as a pretty good affordable tablet. Anyways, that's been it. If you like this video, do give it a thumbs up. If you disliked it, do give it a thumbs down. Let me know down in the comments what are your thoughts on the Galaxy Tab S8 Ultra, and for my fellow Tab S8 Ultra users out there, let me know how your experience has been with this tablet. Anyways, thanks for watching. Share this video if you found it useful. Please subscribe if you haven't, and I'll see you in the next one.